Hi, Claire and James here. Just before we get stuck into this week's episode, we wanted to let you know the exciting news that the Midlife Reset audit is now live. This is a first of its kind personalised diagnostic tool designed for midlifers by midlifers.
In just 3 minutes, the audit will help you pinpoint what's really holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife, and most importantly, provide tailored strategies on how to take back control. Midlife doesn't have to be a time of uncertainty. It can be an era of growth, discovery, and well-being. So to go ahead and take the audit, go to themidlifementors.com/audit.
In today's episode, I'm joined by Professor John Tregonning, a biomedical researcher and the author of Live Forever, A Curious Scientist's Guide to Wellness, Aging and Death. After reading about how Professor Tregonning had tried and trialed numerous longevity hacks for his book and had found what worked, what didn't and what might, we just knew we had to have a chat with him. We talk about his testing of life-extending diets and exercise regimes, and we cut through the noise of fads to separate fact from fiction. We look at the risks our bodies and minds face, and this conversation offers compelling insights into how our bodies work, how we can best look after them, and most importantly, how we can live longer, healthier lives. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James, and sadly, no Claire today. The winter lurgy has got her and laid her low, but I'm sure she'll be back, very, very soon, and definitely back for the next podcast. So that's a bit of a shame, but aside from Claire being ill, what have we been up to? Well, January has flown by. I can't believe how fast it went, despite the fact it did seem to have about 6 or 7 weeks in it. It did go quite fast. I did dry January. After going to the pub to watch the rugby, I can say that I've very safely broken the dry January now. But we've had a great month, lots of corporate work. Of course, my book's coming along, getting ready to get that out, and just forging forward and looking forward to February. Anyway, I'm very excited to be joined by an amazing guest today. You'll know that we love talking about life hacks that are easy to implement, and we love talking about things that are going to optimize our health and about longevity, and I especially love getting to the longevity side of things. So I am thrilled that today we have joining us Professor John Tregonning of Imperial University, author of Live Forever. Welcome, John.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Great to have you here. Now, I came across you, and I think I was reading the Telegraph, and you've written a quite humorous article in there about some of the research you've been doing while you were writing your book. So can I ask you, first of all, what drew you to the field of aging and longevity?
Yeah, it was really slightly selfish, or certainly self-motivated. I'd noticed the signs of aging in myself, and the kind of the denial was no longer possible. So holding my phone much further from my face to be able to read it, the hair that I'd been saying, oh, that's definitely blonde, was beginning to be grey. Actually, I noticed I had a haircut this weekend, and just the piles of grey hair falling on my lap, and those were enough to think, actually, well, maybe I am aging after all.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm at the stage now. It's very fashionable to have restaurants and bars quite dimly lit. So now I'm out. I've got my phone torch on to read the menu in a lot of places. Terrible. So within the context of your book, there's been, I guess, there's a lot of hype at the moment coming out of Silicon Valley about all these people looking at longevity tweaks. But how are you defining the concept of living forever within your book? Are you talking about a kind of radical life enhancement, or just ways we can add healthy, productive years to our life?
I think healthy, productive years. I really like the phrase health span versus lifespan. So lifespan is just, increasing the number of times you transit the sun, whereas health span is increasing the time that you're happy and healthy and able to enjoy it.
I like that. I love that health span. Yes, because of course with the advance in medical science, we should all be living longer, but it's about that quality of life that we have as well. So I like that. Now, in your book, you very kindly sent me a copy of that. You kind of break down, it's the chapter format is you're breaking down the biggest killers and what we can do about them. Can you summarize some of those here for us?
Yeah. So I took it from a very much like a UK perspective. So I used the Office of National Statistics data, and there are subtle differences if you're a man or a woman, but the big five in the UK are going to be dementia, heart attacks, blood pressure related things. So that's mostly strokes, cancer, and lung disease. And so they sort of conveniently map onto the major body systems as well. So that gave me a sort of framework to think about how our bodies work, what goes wrong, and actually the massive progress we've made in fixing and repairing things once they go wrong.
That's really interesting. I mean, and hearing you say those things, my mind instantly goes to thinking about the lifestyle adjustments that we can make to kind of, I guess, lower our risk there. And I think that's very much where you're coming from in the book. Before we get into that, did you get any surprises when you were looking at any of the data, or was it pretty much as you expected?
Most of it was as expected. I think one of the things I hadn't appreciated or seen before was that hearing aids are very good as a way to prevent dementia. So people getting age-associated hearing loss, it's better to get hearing aids early because actually, as you begin to lose your hearing, you begin to become isolated socially, and that then accelerates the dementia. So actually, quite a relatively simple kind of improvement is to get hearing aids, and actually then you reconnect with people again.
Wow. Okay, that's useful. That's not one you actually think was a logical step. When you explain it like that, it does make sense. Claire's always saying that I suffer from marital deafness, but it could just be a selective thing, I think. What are the biological mechanisms that are most central to the aging process, and which are the ones we can do something about currently?
Yeah, so I think where we are as a kind of field or sort of medicine, we're probably better at doing things like epidemiology. So the big studies where you're looking at how populations behave and population level risk. It gets much harder moving into the mechanisms. So there definitely will be a cell in our body that's making a substance that then triggers a whole cascade of things. But pulling that all apart is very, very difficult. I think in terms of kind of really broad brush things that you want to avoid is certainly high levels of inflammation in your body, but what that actually means, so it's definitely you don't want to be running the system too hot, but what that means and how to change it is very difficult. I think the other thing is avoiding repeated inhalation of noxious substances, and that can be, that can be traffic pollution, that can be smoking, that can actually be job related. So anything, breathing the same thing into your lungs lots of times is very, very bad for you.
Okay, I'm going to segue here slightly. It might be unfair because you might not know this, but I'm thinking about tragically we lost Paul Danan recently, and it was blamed on vaping. And obviously, vaping was seen as a healthier alternative to smoking when it first appeared. But is that inhalation of those chemicals actually very, very bad for your lungs?
It's definitely better than smoking. It's not good. So if you have a choice of do nothing or vape, do nothing is better. But if you are currently, say, smoking any number of cigarettes, 20 a day, moving to vaping is going to be better. But it is the repeat inhalation of a cocktail of substances. Your lungs just don't like it, and it
Right.
stresses out the cells in the lungs, and then your lungs are kind of, if you imagine them, they're like a sieve. So they're really good at taking the air in, the oxygen that we need in, and releasing carbon dioxide. But also patrolling the lungs are immune cells, white blood cells, and they eat up the particulate matter. But they do get stressed, and when they're stressed, they may start attacking your lungs itself rather than the particulate stuff. So not stressing out your lungs through repeat inhalation is really beneficial.
Okay, and I guess that goes to the other major organs of the body as well. Just don't put them under too much stress.
Yeah, that's true. And so one of the kind of high risk things that people do, I mean, is eating red meat. So red meat, or particularly things like bacon, which has been kind of processed. And I'm not talking sort of ultra processed food, but sort of cured meats
Mm-hmm.
do cause gut inflammation. and that can lead to these things called polyps, which are the kind of the beginning of gut cancer. So reducing red meat is definitely beneficial because, again, you're not repeatedly sort of irritating your gut.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Um, I guess what other lifestyle factors did you come across when you were researching all this that would be easy for people to implement that could have an effect on their health span?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything easy. I think it's all I think it's a combination of lots of different things. I tried lots of them. So I did try cold water swimming. I got my genes sequenced. I had my whole blood analysis. I did an ECG. I ate more beetroot. I tried sort of eating more fiber, and all of them are quite difficult and quite sort of, and the sort of marginal gains from them aren't massive. I think the biggest, the four main conclusions, and they shouldn't come as a surprise, are don't smoke, drink less, probably nothing, eat well, and do exercise. And I think actually that then comes down to how you live your life. And it's not a hack, it's just kind of this is beneficial. I think there is one other aspect, which is the social aspect, which was really interesting.
Yeah. We'll come on to that a bit later because it is really interesting. It's something we talk about a lot, certainly. But I want to go back to cold water swimming. So I'd love to know what you discovered about this because obviously, we had Wim Hof. There was a lot of claims made about extreme cold immersion with breath work, many of which are kind of now in the process of being debunked, I believe. But from personal experience, last winter, Claire and I committed to swimming in Hampstead ponds like at least 3 times a week. So, we were breaking the ice, getting in. It was very cold. And it's meant to be very good for your immune system, but we've never been sicker. This year we haven't swum. And well, Claire's ill now, but I've been fine.
Yeah, I mean, the cold water swimming thing is interesting. I think there are benefits to it because you're doing exercise. There may be benefits because you're doing it in a nice place with people that you like. It is certainly not without risk. You're just as likely to drown, have a heart attack, or get hypothermia. So it's not a kind of cure-all. The immune system side of things is not particularly well validated. What has been observed is that people who, after cold water immersion, you get more white blood cells in your blood rather than maybe in your tissues, but they're probably just coming out of the tissues and then going back into them again. So whether that means anything beneficial at all is unclear. So I don't think there is an immune benefit beyond the fact that you're doing exercise, and actually that's probably where the benefit falls.
Right. And I love with your book, you've always come at it from a very research-led perspective looking at this, because I think one of the problems we have today with social media is that there's a lot of what I'd call bro science out there. We had the Liver King of just like, oh, have a diet that's high in offal and, you can get really muscular and avoid all your illnesses. And then turned out it was actually taking loads of steroids. But we have things like Silicon Valley, that like the guy who's taking like I think bone marrow from his teenage son and stuff like that. I mean, there are clearly some big technological advances going on, but how does the man or woman in the street separate the kind of what will work and what's just kind of pseudoscience at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's typical. I mean, the simplest advice is, certainly if you're in the UK, have a look on the NHS website. So the NHS will have validated science that's based on large population studies, and they won't put anything on there unless it has a really good, legitimate science backing to it. I think sometimes what gets modeled, so there are two bits to my book. So I did the reading and the science and the research, and that is looking into the big number stuff. The kind of studies I did on myself, they were illustrative. They're not science. Science needs to be replicable. So it has to be in lots of people. And it also has to have like a disprovable hypothesis. You can't just say, well, I think I'll live forever, because there's no way of disproving that. So the going to proper validated sources rather than reading kind of what people are saying on Twitter is probably the best advice. What I've kind of slightly noticed recently is there's a bit of kind of a stopped clock thing. So, it's like a stopped clock will be right twice in a day. Yeah. Some of these people do say stuff that is kind of sensible, eat healthily. You're not going to, or do more exercise. But then there is a range of other stuff in there, which is then a bit distracting. So it is really confusing. And I think I think I'm lucky in having a kind of 25 years of science research background to be able to kind of pull things apart and having the tools and the skill set to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you are there because I mean, something that I've come across recently is obviously glucose monitors have become extremely popular, and everyone's suddenly obsessed about their insulin spikes and their glucose levels. But yeah, clients saying to me like, "Oh, should I do 20 squats before every meal so I get less of a blood sugar spike?" I'm like, "Well, if you want to, but actually, we're designed to have a blood sugar spike when we eat, so I really wouldn't worry about it that much unless you're like diabetic." And again,
Yeah,
I think it's this thing we can hear some of this stuff, and then people take it to the nth degree, and we don't stop to think about how that will fit into our lifestyle and if it's really practical.
yeah, exactly. So for people living with diabetes, either type 1 or type 2, glucose monitors are really important, really helpful. But for people who are not, who don't have those conditions, actually it doesn't tell you very much. You will, if you have a chocolate bar, your glucose will go up, then the insulin will kick in and it will go back down again. And that's just the way it is. And yes, you'll probably feel a bit grotty if you eat a load of sweets. I mean, that's just how we are. So having more information doesn't necessarily help you do anything better. And I suppose the one area it could be beneficial. So the some of the monitoring watches do have abilities to pick out certain types of heart arrhythmia. So there is beginning to be reporting that can be beneficial. And I suppose just knowing that, noticing I know some people who notice like their heart rate changes when they're sick. It's quite a good sign of knowing when they're feeling a bit under the weather. So you can get information. Whether that then can change your behavior, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it's like you be selective with what information you think is going to be helpful and how you apply it to your life. Because again, yeah, I wore a monitor for a while that showed me heart rate variability, and it showed you one thing was sleep quality. But I found that in the morning, first thing I did was checking it. If it's saying you didn't sleep well, I was kind of like, oh, well, then my day is not going to be great today because I didn't sleep. And I wasn't checking with myself. I was relying on that, which obviously the data was correct, but didn't always reflect how I was feeling, I guess, on an emotional keel.
Yeah, and I think so with the sleep ones, I think for me trying it, I would then worry that I'm not sleeping. And you worry
Exactly.
about
Yeah.
insomnia, and you become it's all quite cyclical. And there was a really interesting kind of somebody was being interviewed on the radio the other day and talking about again it's average, and some people do need less sleep, some people need more, some people, quite a lot of people do have interrupted sleep. That's just the way their kind of bodies are set up. So overly worrying about sleep, I think, is really unhelpful.
Yeah, no, I echo that. Yeah, I think maybe we read the same thing. Give your sleep animal. There were bears, lions, dolphins, and things. It was quite interesting.
Yeah,
My wife's definitely a dolphin. Very sensitive to noise. Often get a punch in the night for making too much noise while I'm sleeping.
yeah.
When you were looking at all this, did you come across any really promising breakthroughs that were on the that have just happened or that were on the verge of? Do you think?
I think there's one family of drugs that are exciting, but they feel a long way off, and they're called senolytic drugs. And what they may do is kind of reset some of the damage done with aging. So as we age, our ability to kind of self-repair begins to dwindle, and so these senolytics may help clear up some of the debris that accumulates in different tissues. They are definitely not ready yet, and any version of them is going to be quite toxic because actually their process is killing cells and causing, so they then at some point it will get to where they kind of balance out the toxicity with the functionality, and that may well have a big effect, but they are a long way off. I suppose the other, I mean, it's not a new drug, but the semaglutide or Wegovy, the GLP-1 blockers have been extremely effective, and we are entering an age where they will be used a lot more to help support people with living with diabetes or living with obesity. So those kind of drugs will be more widely used, I think, going forward.
I'll ask you on that because what's your view? They obviously have got a very effective use when people do have diabetes or they are obese. But what's your view on people who are just a little bit overweight and now taking them as a matter of course? And we do know this is happening.
So the concern with that is that there isn't an infinite supply of these drugs at the moment, and there are definitely people who have a greater need than others. And so by taking it, it may be that you're then stopping somebody else, and certainly it may be that people are getting it on a private prescription as opposed to somebody else who would be relying on the NHS to support them. So it may be that it becomes a thing about money rather than about health need, and that's not fair.
Mm. And do you think are there any downsides to taking it if you don't really need it, if you're not massively overweight?
I don't know. I mean, I think you aren't going to enjoy food as much, and so you'll miss out on some of the kind of enjoyable parts of life. I don't. Some people experience side effects of them, but you know, not wildly. But I don't see. You shouldn't race to use them if you don't. If they're not prescribed, you shouldn't race to use them.
Yeah. I get it on an intellectual level. I get it. I think we live in a very image obsessed culture. People think, oh, I just want to lose a few pounds. Dieting's really hard. Working out's really hard. If I just jab myself with this thing, the weight will drop away because I won't even be hungry anymore. So, but it's I think it's more reflection on culture than anything else. But yeah, interesting. Having done all this research, did you change any of your habits?
Sort of marginally. So probably do eat more vegetarian meals now. So increasing the amount of vegetarian, trying to reduce the red meat intake. And then there's an NHS again app called Drink Free Days, where you can just log days where you don't have a drink, rather than trying to kind of fit it a certain number of units or something. You just say, I'm going to have more drink-free days, and that stops. It's been helpful at stopping like not having a pint of beer when you get home or a glass of wine or something. Just that kind of low grade kind of alcohol sort of grazing. So those two have been quite helpful.
That's great. And that's just one of the question I wanted to ask you. What is the body's capacity for repair? So see if you have been smoking, vaping for a while and you stop, what does that mean for your lungs? If you've been drinking for a while, but then you stop, do you go back to a good optimal level, or is there damage that's already done that's irreversible?
Unfortunately, there's damage that's done that's irreversible. I think particularly with smoking. So our lungs basically decline in function in a fairly linear way. We're losing a bit of lung function every year from about our mid-20s. If you then insult your lungs through smoking, you just knock that level down, and then you'll carry on. If you then stop, you'll carry on in the same kind of slope. You'll just be further down the hill as you carry on. You're not necessarily going to regain function after doing something smoking. The liver is more regenerative, but substantial, if you've done substantial chronic damage from very excess drinking, it won't start repairing itself.
Right. Okay. So listeners, don't start if you haven't started already. But in midlife, you might have had some of those bad habits. But if you're still doing them, time to give them up for sure. One thing I loved near the end of the book, you've got a little table of do's, don'ts, and maybes, and there were some quite funny things there. I was going to ask you about those. So one of the do's was cut your toenails. Why?
So it's an interesting one. It's quite often certainly in geriatric patients, it's a sign of health and mobility. If you are able to bend over enough to cut your own toenails, then that implies, first of all, that you are still flexible and mobile, and secondly, that you're probably still paying attention to your own appearance and you're thinking about yourself. So it's it may be more like a biomarker of health. It shows that a whole body is probably okay.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. And one of the don'ts was playing the bagpipes.
So this comes back to the inhaling badness. So basically,
I thought you were going to say something about being antisocial.
No. So modern bagpipes have a rubber bag rather than an old leather bag, and that can fill up with fungus and stuff, and people start inhaling it and cause us a nasty lung disease. So if you feel obliged to play the bagpipes, then at least wash them out occasionally.
Right. Okay. Big tip there for any bagpipers. wash your bagpipes out. You mentioned earlier on, we said we'd come back to it, was the impact of loneliness or isolation. Could you just expand on that bit?
Yeah, so I kind of got to this towards the end of the book, and it was kind of two bits of data that are the mirror image of each other. So the first is about social isolation, and this is a study done by the US Surgeon General, and what they observed was that smoking has an equivalent risk ratio as being isolated has the same risk ratio as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having 6 alcoholic drinks. So it accelerates your risk of dying. It shortens your life significantly. The other kind of the flip side is a study called the Harvard longevity study. So this is they looked at a group of 20-year-olds who enrolled in Harvard in the 1960s. It was actually John F. Kennedy's intake those years, and they followed them up through life, and they looked at the outcomes, and then because they had all this data, they could say these are the things that made people live longer. These are the risk factors. One of the big risk factors was severe alcoholism. So a chunk of the cohort died in their 50s because they had drunk absolutely to excess. I mean, this was sort of a bottle of whiskey a night. Really, really, really heavy drinkers. But of the people who survived through the 50s and 60s, actually the people who were socially connected had longer lives, but also better, healthier lives as well.
Right. So that social connection is so important. Yeah. And I guess it's interesting because in modern society, we see that elderly people often end up quite isolated. We don't perhaps have the same family care structure that we used to have a few generations ago. So I guess that's something for society to be working on in terms of preserving health, well, not just health, but happiness as well.
Yeah, and probably would have a sort of beneficial economic effect. So if people are feeling supported and live long, they're not going to get as sick, and they might not need as much treatment, and therefore it's a sort of prevention rather than cure type approach.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, the book is fantastic, and you tried loads of things. If you could just summarize the key takeaways for listeners, if it's just just go and do these simple things to potentially live longer, or let's say have a better quality of life, improve that health span, what would they be?
So I think my biggest take home is do more of what you like with people you love. Don't spend lots of money doing, getting your fecal microbiome sequenced or getting a glucose monitor. Take that money and go to the theatre with your family, or go to a concert, or join a club and take up a hobby. That connectivity piece, especially if you can link it to exercise. So, go and do a park run, go and join a dancing club. If you can do exercise socially, that is the thing that's going to it will make the exercise a bit easier, and actually you'll get the benefit of the connectivity too.
I love that. That's absolutely great advice. So John, what's next? Another book? More research?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly do more research. So my lab, we are looking at a virus called respiratory syncytial virus. It causes a lot of severe disease in little babies, and we're really interested in. So amazingly, there's a vaccine for it. So it's amazing because it's taken 50 years, and there's this new vaccine for it which will give protection to babies and actually prevent babies going to hospital. And we're just trying to understand the immune responses and how the things interact. So I think realistically what's next is get back into my proper science lab rather than experimenting on myself, and try to understand more about the kind of the viral world. But I will certainly am accumulating stories and ideas for the next book too.
Fantastic. And your book, Live Forever, it's out now, available in all good bookshops, and online retailers like Amazon, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's out and available, and yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Fantastic. John, it's been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. We'll put a link to the book in the show notes. If anyone wanted to reach out to you or just learn more about you, where can they do that?
I think probably Twitter. I think I'm at Dr. Tregonning on Twitter. So if you can wade through some of the good stuff there. I'm also on Substack, and I think that's probably Professor John Tregonning. So there's a couple of different places. But luckily, there's not very many Tregonnings about. So if you just type John Tregonning into Google, you'll definitely find me.
Awesome. John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you, so drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and don't forget to take the Midlife Reset audit now to receive personalised insights into what's holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife. So go ahead and take the audit now at themidlifementors.com/audit.